Hi, everybody. This is Ellen Bristol, president of Bristol Strategy Group. And today is the third of our series of three short conversations between myself and my colleague, George Khaldun, co-founder of the Harlem Children's Zone. We want to sum up our three-part series today by discussing what it takes to move forward and escalate your nonprofit's ability to achieve significant impacts. And we have five key points we want to go over with you. So as a short intro here, I wanted to remind everybody that about 10 to 20% of all US nonprofits are way up there. They raise hundreds of millions of dollars a year. They have hundreds, if not thousands, of employees. They have national brands. I'm sure all of them have room to improve as well, but we're primarily addressing mid-size and small nonprofits who make up more than 80% of all US nonprofits. And I've discovered that throughout the world, similar problems occur in the nonprofit and NGO space. So as we've wrestled with what the challenges are in the social sector, George, and as we've talked about organizations that do exceptionally well and what practices they have, let's start with a discussion that I'd like you to kick off about the first 3 points, which are under the heading of leadership's willingness to face the brutal facts. And you had some really good insights about facing the brutal facts around needs. How do you quantify and present the data around your needs?
I think that thanks, Ellen. I think that working with as being the former COO of the Harlem Children's Zone, the question of need is extremely important when you are developing a program and asking funders or asking others to support you. One of the things that I found that was important is that you must have adequate data that really highlights the social conditions of your community if you're working in a community. So collecting the data, what are the conditions of the community? How many children are missing school? What is the condition of the housing? What is the condition of the overall environment of that community? So you have to collect that data, real live data, and so that you can look at clearly what's going on in your community. Funders oftentimes want to see exactly how, if they were to fund you, how would you address those issues that are confronting your society, confronting your community. What are you going to do if I did give you $1,000 or $2,000
or $1 million?
Yeah. So what are you going to do with that money, given the conditions that you said that you want to address? So those are big questions that we should ask ourselves as we try to improve the quality of life for our participants, families, and children that we are working with in our communities.
The thing that interests me about this is that this is the kind of research you would do if you were starting a business and seeking investment capital to run that business. Your bankers or your venture funders would say, show me the market opportunity.
Absolutely.
How many people would buy, and so on and so forth. So there's an analogy here that says, whether it's a startup or an established organization, you constantly have to get that data and refresh it to keep it up to date.
Absolutely. And you have to be able to keep that data up to date. But what also is important is that your funders or others see that you actually have a strategy and addressing those problems. Once you look at the data, then they want to see, what is your strategy? What is your timeline? How do you expect to achieve the goals that you have outlined to us? Those are important questions, secondary questions that funders want to know. Do you have the staff? Do you have the people who could actually carry it out? You know, and what is that going to cause? And what type of strategies that you're implying or going to use to achieve your overall objective or goal?
Part of those strategies are your strategies for ameliorating the social needs you just described. So what is your programmatic strategy? If you're going to be working with children and currently truancy rates are highly undesirable, how are you going to resolve those truancy rates? If you're working in medical research, what do you need to find out that you don't currently know?
Absolutely. You have to be able to say, okay, and we have 10,000 children in our community that are behind in reading and math, and we have a 50% dropout rate. And so therefore, you're going to have to go to them, for example, and say, look, I'm going to have 8 after-school programs that address the issues of math and reading. I'm going to hire 25 tutors to work with these kids 4 or 5 hours a day. And we're going to have a strict testing system so that we'll do a pre and post test so we're able to see the progress of these children. So you have to develop a strategy around how are you going to implement and execute a program that will improve the quality for children, for example. And this can apply to adults too, if it's a whole question of getting adults to read better or better health care, et cetera, et cetera. Something very pragmatic, meaning that and over a period of time, in 3 years' time, the whole issue will be under control or eliminated.
Right. Well, I'm thinking about 2 things here. One is, it doesn't matter who you mean when you say community. It can mean a social service need, like the community in Harlem, New York, which was in bad shape. Or it can mean the community of people who suffer from the heartbreak of psoriasis. Or it can mean the community of people who care about preserving Civil War documentation. It doesn't matter what the...
Yes, I totally agree. It could be asthma, right?
Right.
We noticed in New York that there was high incidences of asthma for children who lived in Harlem, you know?
Correct.
And so we connected with the hospital, we connected with the schools, and we tried to figure out what was causing this. And once we were able to figure out what was causing it, you were able to design a program that will help eliminate, bring down the incidence of asthma. So again, you have to develop strategies that are workable.
And that will address the resolution of these needs. So we've covered 2 points of our 5 so far. First is, under facing the brutal facts, understanding the needs of the community or community-like group that you're going to serve with data. And second of all, defining programmatic strategies that are measurable, where you can constantly compare whether or not you are, in fact, ameliorating the needs in one way or another. And that often leads, I want to be careful we don't go offline here, but I wanted to mention the March of Dimes. You and I are old enough to remember when kids were still dying of polio, right?
Absolutely.
And the mission and vision of the March of Dimes was to eliminate polio.
Yes.
Well, guess what, folks? Polio has been eliminated except for a few third world countries.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
that meant that March of Dimes had a big apparatus they'd developed, but they'd actually fulfilled their vision.
Absolutely.
So they have had to go through a whole lot of soul searching to come up with a new vision and a new mission. Now they were they had capacity without a problem to solve. So let's look at the third element of this facing the brutal facts thing, and that is funding. So let me address that first. Okay?
Go ahead.
Funding is a very peculiar animal in nonprofit organizations. People are afraid of it. They, folks will serve on the board, but the second thing they'll say after yes is, but don't make me ask for money, right? And I've made reference to the research that we've done, which shows a majority of nonprofits have very poor controls over the way they manage their income generation, especially if it's from philanthropy. So we have to have a whole lot of courage in facing the facts. And the facts aren't only that it's difficult to raise money, and we need to give those who are raising the money, be they staff or board or contractors or other volunteers, a lot of support. But we also need to face the facts of whether or not we're spending enough of the money we're raising and we're spending it the right way. You made a great analogy in our last conversation that if we had 1,000 employees and $1 zillion, but we were only serving 10 kids, there's something wrong with that picture.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
So how do we resolve the confusions or the reluctance felt by leadership and management of nonprofits for facing the need for a predictable, consistent income, and for reporting to the board that we're under-resourced or over-resourced?
Right. I think that it begins, again, with the CEO and the chief operating officer and the executive board of the organization, the executive staff, I should say. Once we have laid out our strategy to the board of directors, then it becomes a question of execution.
Right.
We said we wanted to eliminate asthma in 3 years, or bring it down to 30% in 3 years. You have to show them, number one, as I mentioned, your strategy for doing that. And once the board signs off on it, then there's a mere question of execution. So did we work with the 50 children we said we were going to work with? Did those 50 children, the question of asthma, was it reduced in the 3 years? Those are the questions that you want to ask. So in the first year, your board will want to know, how many did you do in year one? So you go back to them and say, in year one, we're able to reduce it 10%. And then you go back in year two and say, we were able to reduce it 30%. And so by the time you get to year three, you say, well, by the time it's year three, we would have reduced it and met our goal of a 70% reduction in asthma. So it's a question of communication, execution, one, and then communicating to your board of directors and letting them know that there has been progress and you have reduced asthma by 70% in that particular community. And you don't stop there. And then you say, well, in order to get to the other 40% or so, or 30%, we need an additional $2 million so that we can address that problem. And so there you build the confidence in the board, and you build confidence with your funders so they can see that you're able not only to conceive and come up with a great idea or concept, but you're able to do the research. Then you're able to put together an operable plan, and then you're able to achieve that particular plan. But all the way, you got to keep all your funders involved. You got to keep them, put them on notice of what you're doing, and your board has to be fully informed of what's happening in your particular program. And this is the way you get people to support you, not only in year 1, 2, and 3, but years 4, 5, and 6.
So you've highlighted two of the critical elements in the last, issues number 4 and number 5 are both related to execution. Part of it is keeping everyone informed about how the data is progressing. If there's been an economic breakdown, we enter another recession, we may have to scale back our target. We might even have to cancel certain programs. If things are good, let's get plenty of money. Let's put some money in reserve for the next rainy day.
Absolutely.
But it's always a conversation between leadership, senior management, and the board about our actual data, what the needs are, how rapidly we're addressing them, how much money we need, and all of these things are constantly informing each other. And then the last item we're going to touch on is how we can constantly develop the professionalism, management, and leadership skills of our team. And we're running out of time, so let's make sure we get that on the table. As our organizations grow and become more professional, we, who maybe we were the founders or board members or staff members, have to step up our game because people's lives depend on our ability to do so.
Yeah, that's extremely important, Ellen. One of the things that leadership has to think about, and the board has to think about this, and our funders have to think about, oftentimes they give us little money for training. And so training is an important part of developing profit and nonprofit. There's over $130 billion a year is spent in training in the private sector. So therefore, it's extremely important that you develop a plan that will allow you to train your staff from the supervisors, your coordinators, your VPs, and your senior management team. There has to be an ongoing training mechanism has to be put forth. And that's normally done by your human resources department, which most funders don't like to fund. But it's extremely important that your people that do the hiring for your company, your human resources department, sets up trainings for different people at different levels. So therefore, they're able to develop their skills as you go along. So you got every year, you should put aside so many thousands of dollars for training. And then your human resources department does the follow-up to see if you've taken the training, what have you learned from the training, and how effective the training has been.
It's interesting to note that companies that hold high expectations for their staff tend to have more engaged employees. And that nonprofits really need their staffs to be deeply engaged with their mission. And I believe they do that by developing the management and leadership skills, because management and leadership are in part responsible for employee engagement. And if you don't have employee engagement, you don't have funder engagement. If you don't have funder engagement, you can't serve your clients.
And this is why your CEO and your COO and your management team have to be authentic. Oftentimes, when they are not authentic, staffs tend to shy away, or when they speak to them or they send them to training, they don't see you as being authentic. Therefore, even if they take the training, there's no buy-in from the staff.
Right.
The staff has to buy into the mission, and it's up to the leadership to see to it that the staff understands the mission and buy in. And therefore, when you have trainings, the staff is more engaged in that particular training, and they get much more out of it.
I love it. So I'm going to really quickly summarize our 5 key points, and then we'll close for this series. Point number 1, be willing to face the brutal facts, which means 1, understanding the needs of the community you serve.
Absolutely.
Data. 2, understanding the strategies and the data associated with those strategies that allow you to have programmatic impact. And 3,
Right.
understanding your funding requirements so that you can have impact, and keeping data on all of those interlocking business functions. 4, focusing on execution by engaging board, senior staff, and leadership in everything it takes to look at what's working, have the guts to look at what's not working, and constantly move forward. And 5, invest in continuous education, training, and professional development. And with all of those in place, you're going to run a successful nonprofit.
Absolutely.
Thanks, George.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Bye for now.